The Dungeon Delve podcast would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which it was created, and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging.
Hello, this is Christian from Hermes D&D Services.
And this is Sven from Crit and Miss.
And this is the Dungeon Delve podcast.
Here we are with episode 2 of the Dungeon Delve, The Forgotten Realms. So Sven, Forgotten Realms is a huge staple in Dungeons & Dragons. It's actually, from what I've noticed in my experience as a DM, confused to be like Dungeons & Dragons itself. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will think of this as, if there is a pantheon of Dungeons and Dragons, they'll think of the pantheon of the Forgotten Realms. It's often confused as being like it's like if you were to play Monopoly and then reskin it with Marvel Monopoly. People think that the original Monopoly is the Forgotten Realms and then other things added on top, like the Rick and Morty expansion, skins added on top of that. But the Forgotten Realms is actually a skin in its own. Mm-hmm. It's its own added on world. It was created by Ed Greenwood as a set of stories that he wrote when he was 8 years old.
Man, I could barely even read when I was 8 years old, let alone start writing a whole campaign setting.
Yeah. Look, he definitely puts a lot of us in the dirt with that. I don't know how, obviously, truthful of this, how fleshed out it was. Like, I was writing stories when I was a kid, but they were like a green dragon under a bed that ate my socks. So whether or not he was writing a full illustrated novel at 8, if he was, go Ed Greenwood. If you know, comment in the comments of the podcast. But that's the extent of my knowledge. For Forgotten Realms, though, it wouldn't be until 1975 that his world, Toril, would have its first adventuring party when he introduced the world itself to Dungeons & Dragons. So he'd been writing it for a while and then brought it into the game itself. So it was a story before it was in the game, which with a lot of these worlds in Dungeons & Dragons seems to be the case. From there, it was obviously played by many people as its own setting, and eventually Ed sold it to TSR, which is the company of Dungeons & Dragons, and was published officially in 1987 as its own setting for people to play in. Forgotten Realms is a very coloured place itself. You've got a lot of amazing areas that people associate with Dungeons & Dragons. Waterdeep, the sprawling sort of bank heisty campaign setting. Neverwinter, set in the peaks with Oriel, the winter spirit, and Baldur's Gate, which has been brought into many different settings now. They brought it into Magic the Gathering, I think. I can't remember which setting it has Vecna, but obviously that's been taken into even Stranger Things now in like TV.
It's really, it really plays host to a lot of those iconic sort of D&D locations and creatures, and it's even grown to sort of consume some of the other sort of campaign worlds as well.
Exactly. Like a lot of the main popular people inside here that you have, there's groups of like the Harpers, a bit not well known, but then you've got individuals like Drizzt the Earthen, the Ranger Drow, and he's a really amazing commander in Magic the Gathering. I've got a deck around him. But then you've also got people like Volo, the Adventurer, who's a character in the story that Ed Greenwood wrote, and there's now an entire source book around Volo's monsters. All of this stuff is just becoming so mainstream now that it's more than even a setting. That being said, though, the Forgotten Realms, about the actual place itself. So the setting itself is based around several different worlds. The main one that a lot of these people and adventures are on is called Faerun. It's a large continent on the world of Toril. Now, Toril is the main planet and the main setting. And if you've played any sort of Spelljammers, you'll probably know a few of the different worlds of D&D. Otherwise, this is going to be completely new information to you. Spelljammers, for those unknown, is you have a spaceship intermixed with the high fantasy, and you can travel between a lot of the different worlds of Dungeons and Dragons.
That sounds like a future episode of the Dungeon Delve podcast right there. Spelljamming.
Definitely. I've actually never played in Spelljammers myself. The closest I've got to, I guess, that sort of a setting is I did play in a Warhammer 40k kind of crossover of Dungeons and Dragons, which was really fun. I enjoyed having a big gun and mech suits. Have you ever done anything like high fantasy but mixed with technology?
No, I can't say that I have. I'm not going to lie. The Forgotten Realms is sort of my go-to setting. If you watch any of our previous streams, you'll find that most of my games are set in the Forgotten Realms. But the idea of being able to mix sci-fi and that sort of that high fantasy, it's really exciting. So if you don't see a spelljamming campaign sometime in the future on our channel, it's highly likely it's going to be happening. Because not only can you mix in, that high fantasy setting, you can also sort of get really deep into maybe like that eldritch sort of horror and all that kind of stuff. Really, the possibilities are endless.
Exactly. It'd be fun to have a space battle with mind flayers and their Neolithic ships in your own craft. But like you said, the Forgotten Realms being your main setting, it's the main setting for a lot of people. The continents, however, that are there, if you ever wanted to explore any of them, just quickly, you've got obviously Faerun being the main setting. Another continent is Kara-Tur, Maztica, Zahara, Laracond, if I'm pronouncing that right. And those are some of the main settings, but Faerun is often the main one where people are seen. But I guess the advantage of having all these different continents is if you wanted to create something fresh yourself, because I myself personally love homebrew, you can use these other worlds that aren't as fleshed up on and create your own story. You could even turn into an Ed Greenwood of yourself and eventually have your own published content in Dungeons and Dragons, which is the dream for a lot of DMs. But for Toril and the world itself, there obviously all of these different settings that we're going across and all these different worlds have their own creation myths. Some are a lot more fleshed out than others, and the Forgotten Realms is one that is especially detailed, not just the creation of the world, but even the ages that it goes through. This place is nearly more categorized and recorded than our world with ancient history that we have. They seem to know more about this place than we know about our entire world's lore. For it itself, there's a couple of different ideas of creation myths, and I guess the reason that Ed Greenwood did that and other DMs have done it in the future is to mirror real life when no one really fully knows, and you can eventually have a god in your story tell the people, I am the one who made the universe. But it's always hard to kind of tell who. Like all the universes, though, this one started as nothing and then had life kind of burst into it. Life of itself was in the form of a greater deity called Ao. Spelled exactly like it sounds, A-O, and he was Ed Greenwood's version of God, basically. In modern D&D in the Forgotten Realms, he's more or less associated with a version of like Zeus or Odin, where he's kind of just like the greater god of them. But originally he was like the creator and the one above all, which really goes into the ages here that I'll go through quickly, and you'll kind of get a taste of how more powerful he is compared to the the more modern versions of people seeing him as like a Zeus or an Odin. So, Forgotten Realms has 5 main ages that it goes through. There is, I'm pretty sure it's 5. Let me quickly just check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, 6, 7. I'm wrong. There's even more details than I remembered. Okay, I need to step up my World War game. This is insane. So there were originally the creator races. It was the age is known more as that itself, but it was around 5 creator races in the Days of Thunder. Is the title that it kind of has in Toriel's history. So in the Days of Thunder, this was when a lot of these original fabled creator races were starting to come out of caves and areas on the world that Ao had created. Ao, as God in sort of Christianity, started creating the world around him and birthing things into life, making shapes and whatnot. That's at least the basic history that I was able to research.
When I think about Ao, I sort of it conjures to mind in sort of Nordic mythology, maybe more of an Ymir sort of figure, or if you're thinking about Greek mythology, maybe even something like Kronos, like the god of the gods.
Kronos is actually probably a better idea of how he would be represented in this rather than Zeus. Like, he's the head of his pantheon like Zeus, but I guess even Kronos was the head of the Titans. He's definitely more of a Kronos where he kind of shaped everything and was the one above all. But he didn't eat his kids, so that's a plus.
Yeah, that's always a good sign.
One of the ages, though, he does do some pretty messed up stuff to his kids, so he kind of is like Kronos, actually.
Can't wait for that part. So,
the fabled creator races, and in one of them, their name itself was Iquatelquasia, like croissant, in Elven tongue, Iquatelquasia. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And a lot of these races started coming out of said caves. The 5 main first original creator races consisted of humans, elves, Batraki, and a couple of other races as well. The Aerie, which were like an avian race. The Bactri were an amphibious race, and a couple of these have become extinct now, but other ones have survived through the times. The second age was the Dawn Age. So the Age of Dawn, often also called the Time of the Dragons or the Time of the Giants, depending on which side your characters worship or believe in, was a period of 6,000 years. You'll notice as well as we go through these ages that as it starts becoming more and more closer to quote-unquote present time, these ages start becoming shorter and shorter and shorter. And it kind of mirrors real life, actually, where in the Jurassic periods, it was huge spans of time, whereas in modern history now, you have these wars which are so influential and so detailed, but it only goes over 1 or 2 years or a couple of months, and you have these ages that kind of less and less periods of time are actually taken up in between them. But for the Dawn Age, over 6,000 years, it was when the creator races essentially disappeared off of the face of Toriel, whether or not they were defeated and slain by these giants and dragons, or forced into subjugation or hiding, or went back into their cave-like nature. So they walked out of the cave and instantly got slammed, basically. Is how it's kind of told.
Straight back into the cave. Can't blame.
Yeah.
I'm happy in my cave too.
I'm happy in my cave. It's a very safe area. Sure, that's how they felt. But these giants and dragons of this Age of Dawn, it says were far more powerful than the ones that we had in the present age D&D. My guess is that recently in Dragon Lore, Fizban's Dragon that was released, they have the Great Worms, which are like ancient dragons that know about their consciousnesses over like multitudes of universes. I feel like the dragons that were back in this Age of Dawn were great worms or ancient dragons, something of that sort of a sense, and that was like the normal dragon of their time. And then the giants that it says being far more powerful, I even know of some sort of histories and lore where like they show the skeletons and like their head is the size of like an entire mountain. which is much larger than the dragons you get nowadays, which are probably like 30 to 60 feet tall. So these giants of ages past seem to be more like Norse, like you were talking about, and more like the frost giants that you have in Norse history, spanning like skyscraper heights.
So I got a question for you. If the humans and elves and so on and so forth, if they're the creator races, then where do these dragons and giants actually come from? I'm going to throw a curveball at you.
From memory, I think, again, it was just Ao shape. Actually, no. I'm not sure if Ao created these. So some things weren't created by Ao. Some things with the universe itself, and as he was shaping his own sort of art pieces, I think were just birthed into being. Because in the Forgotten Realms, we'll probably go over in another episode, but some of the other sort of created deities were these two coatl serpents that created a lot of the laws of balance in space and time. And their history wasn't being created by Ao. Their history was they just came about from the swirls and chaos of space. A lot of that is the same with like the elder elementals. I think that same is with the giants and the dragons. They kind of just came into being. I don't know. Do you think they're the chicken and the egg? What would you like?
Well, look, I like what you said earlier about some things are left intentionally sort of open-ended, and that sort of mirrors creation myths from all around the world. I can speak of Norse mythology where giants are included in their creation myth, but how they were created in the first place is never really touched upon. So it's sort of it's like this whole other branch of life that was never really sort of explained.
As Dungeons and Dragons does quite a lot, magic. The answer is magic. I actually like how it's not detailed, because as a DM, it gives you that freedom to interpret that yourself and make some awesome backstory where the players learn the creation of the first original dragons, and someone's trying to use that same method to birth like a new dragon into being or something like that. Like you have a lot of open-endedness with it. But that is the Dawn Age. After that comes the first flowering. So this age spanned 12,000 years, a large span of time, and this was where the elves took over the world, basically. The elves went British colonial style and went everywhere. So there was 5 major realms of, I'm going to butcher these, Aravanda, Ilifan, Keltomir, Miarita, and Chantel of Thrier. All of these had their own smaller ones inside them itself. I won't go into those details, but it even spread further than that. During this time as well, there used to be winged elven races called the Averio. Apparently at this time, this was when they were meant to have left Faerun. From memory, it doesn't specify that in any of the research that I did find, but I think they left on Spelljammer ships from memory. They left the planet.
Spelljammer. And for those people who have played the original Baldur's Gate 2 game, you would be familiar with the Winged Elves as one of the most annoying companion characters that you can have in your party.
I've never played that myself, but I'll take it for word. It sounds like I'm Lydia in Skyrim.
Just constant complaining.
But out of these areas, this was when the elves first started to take over the continent, started to spread up around the continent itself. More races started coming into being around here. You had the Yuan Ti, Dragonborn, a lot of things like that. And this is eventually how the elves would have turned into a lot of their sub-races, sea elves, wood elves, high elves, etc. After the first flowering, after 12,000 years of their imperial control, peace, as it does with a lot of these races, ended. And that was the beginning of the Crown Wars. The Crown Wars lasted 3,000 years, so a lot less of time, even though it was still a long period of time compared to how long the elves were around for a lot shorter time. But also, now that I actually think about it, I didn't think about it till right now, this was a war that lasted 3,000 years. That's a long war.
It is a fair bit of time, yeah.
Oh my god! But it says it here, and it kind of makes sense. So this was a series of elven wars throughout the history of Faerun on this continent, fought between all the great elven kingdoms. It was those main 5 ones I read were the ones that participated in this war, like a world war, and it nearly led to the extinction of them as a race. So if history had gone different, there no elves done. But the Crown Wars were an insane thing. I've actually taken the Crown Wars in my own history of one of the worlds that I'm publishing as like a kingdom of elves that kind of used temporal magic to teleport away from it and went to a different dimension, similar to like Spelljam, a bit like using teleportation gates rather than a big ship. But it's a really cool part of history if you do ever want to set a campaign setting in there, have everyone play as different versions of elves and fight in this war. But after the Crown Wars, after 3,000 years of that came the founding time. So when the elves finally had brought themselves to their knees, the war ended, and it was the Age of Proud Peoples. This was when the elves, dwarves, and some humanoid races, including some of the human tribes, started to spread across the world. Obviously, the elves have already done this, but at the end of the world, I'm guessing they more or less just tried to repopulate after realizing they'd messed everything up for so long. But yeah, for 6,000 years, they basically started to go around the world. The human tribes, barbaric tribes, started to come out of their areas. Dwarves started to become a popular race. And the founding time was, again, just kind of an expansionist time. After that, we then had the Age of Humanity. Go figure, it's when humans popped off.
That sounds like the worst age so far. Do you want to just skip over that one, go straight to the next one?
It sounds so boring. Basically, I don't know. As a fantasy person, I've always found humanity just so boring when there's all of these unique and amazing and vibrant races. I go into it to escape and be something awesome and cool, but it still was a cool, an interesting part in history for basically roughly 1,700 years. Humans started to spread across like the elves had done in the first flowering. The main part of this age, when the humans were spreading around, forming a lot of their empires that they did have, and some that may still stand now, was one particular empire called Netheril. So Netheril did something really amazing where they discovered the Nether Scrolls. So exactly like the Elder Scrolls in Skyrim and that sort of story, the Nether Scrolls were D&D's counterpart for them. Depending on which one was created first, you can go back in time and research that. I'm guessing it was the Nether Scrolls in D&D with this Forgotten Realms story. But the Nether Scrolls were basically the same sort of counterpart. They were a series of gold skins of this world serpent that were the fundamentals of magic and magic theory. A lot of them that were taken by the elves during this time were eventually turned into a large tree known to them as the Golden Grove of Hidden Knowledge, and it's where a lot of the elvish races became so mastered around magic because a lot of them were attuned to this tree. But the humans attained these Nether Scrolls and started forming a lot of the magics of the world. It became a large kind of impact in this era. After this era, we then had the era of upheaval. So this was the time...
Here we go. That sounds more like it.
Yes, this is when shit started hitting the fan, so to speak. So in the time of trouble, only lasted, by the looks of it here, like 100 years. So yeah, that's what I mean, is everything starts getting a lot shorter and compact as crap starts going haywire. So the era of upheaval was, let me grab my notes here. That's right. So two gods that are still around in Forgotten Realms nowadays, Bane and Merkel, two gods of war and chaos, and almost even seen as like devils in the way that they're kind of portrayed, but they are gods nonetheless.
But they didn't start off as gods, right?
Yeah, they did. So they were they were two lesser gods in this sort of pantheon, but their domains were things like chaos and killing and war, and they were just seen as evil because of that. Which they were evil, to be fair.
It's a fun fact. Bane and Merkel actually started off as mortals.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yep. And they work their way up to usurp their sort of their pantheon from another god, along with the god of murder, Baal.
That might explain. So I'll go over the two eras right now, and this might be explaining how they came into their power. I'm not too sure. I haven't studied Bane and Merkel, but we can do an episode on both of them. But basically, what happens, as it says, is that Bane and Merkel stole two tablets called the Tablets of Fate, which were created by Ao, call back to God himself. Created by Ao, and their purpose was to govern the universe's balance. So it was kind of like Moses' tablets with the rules, but rather than people having to follow them, this was how the universe worked. So it wasn't a question of if or but. This was, this was how it had to happen and how it had to go through with the universe.
So if I remember correctly, inscribed on the Tablets of Fate was the sort of like the area of that each god sort of ruled over, and what their sort of what's the right word here? What they're responsible for.
Exactly.
Their portfolio.
As an example, one of the main gods I've been doing in my own personal campaign, Bereniestra, is one of the fairy queens, and her domain and her purpose is to be the goddess and fairy goddess of summer. So this tablet told. It was actually like almost like a category folder of just like, this is your god, this is what you do. This is your god, this is what you do. But these Bane and Merkel stole these tablets and hid them, thinking they originally thought at the time that this was a source of Ao's power. They didn't realize that was not the case whatsoever, and instead it just brought Ao into a rage. He brought together all the gods in this huge council and asked them and queried them for who had taken the tablets. None stepped forward because this kind of makes sense where you said they weren't gods yet. Maybe no one there knew because obviously Bane and Merkel weren't there, and so there was no one to answer for it.
Well, if I remember correctly, at this point they'd already taken over the divine portfolio of another god. Yeah, so it was the dead three. It was Bane, Baal, and Merkel.
Okay. Looks like Baal managed to scrape through his teeth here and not be involved in this, though. So in that case, they lied to Ao. No one stepped forward, and Ao, in his rage, cast every single god from the heavens. From wherever their planes were, he just said bye. They all crashed down into the mortal plane. All of them lost their divine powers as well. He stripped... He stripped every single god of their powers, and this is where I kind of go into the fact that he was a step above the rest. He was a step above the rest, where rather than just being like a Zeus or an Odin, where those are more powerful than their like the other deities in their pantheon, they wouldn't have the kind of power to completely just like tear down another god. Ao did this to not only one person, but every god in existence. They all went from the heavens. The only one that he allowed to keep their divine powers was Helm, which is the god of protection, if you know him. And the only purpose of this was that he was then charged with protecting what was known as the celestial staircase away back to heaven, or back to their planes of existence. During this time, during this like 100 years, some mighty heroes in another setting of Dungeons and Dragons and Forgotten Realms found the tablets and brought them back to Ao. It's not explained why from what I found in my research, but he then destroyed them. So they're like, we brought these back, you can be happy again. And he's just pimp-handed the tablets and smashed everything. Okay. This sent the world into utter chaos, and there's a bunch of actual effects that it says ruined the world, basically. There was wild magic strewn across the entire continent. There was areas of no magic that was strewn across the entire continent, like this almost like plague of auras. Mm-hmm. It was whack, as the kids would say.
This is actually the era in which they transitioned, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, into 4th edition Dungeons & Dragons.
Oh, I don't actually know too much about 4th editions myself personally, but that sounds cool if that's the case.
Yeah, so there were a lot of people that weren't overly happy with the changes made to 4th edition, and I could be entirely wrong here, but I believe the Time of Troubles is the period in which the 4th edition D&D is actually set officially?
Well, even though there's some rulings with 4th edition that I don't overly like I think its flanking or advantage is just a +2 on the dice, and as a paladin main, I hate the idea of not getting 2 d20s. But that narrative-wise, that's very cool. I like the idea that there's an actual setting based in one of these eras. But after this time came the Second Sundering, after that entire era. So the Second Sundering, it says, took place over 5 years. So a much shorter period of time. A much shorter period of time. The Second Sundering on Tyrell was a great catastrophic event, and basically it was when Ao, you think it would be good, Ao rebuilt the tablets. He remade them again, reinscribed everything for the gods of their domains, where they were, who their powers were, and you think it would be nice. The problem was that the big man left it vague and wasn't just giving everyone back their spot. So this became a huge power struggle. Think the Cold War, but rather than having two main entities, there was hundreds of entities all vying for power at the exact same time. So Second Sundering came about, and a lot of these gods that had formed from grace used their followers and worshippers and started enacting plans to try to regain their power. Some mortals actually tried stepping in and taking power for themselves and tried to attain godhood, and it was not the nicest of periods of time. And this was also when the Spell Plague happened. The Spell Plague, I don't know too much about it.
That's it. This is when it was set.
This is when it was set?
Yes.
Okay. The Spell Plague, I don't know too much about it myself personally, but I hear it referenced all the time. Mm-hmm. The Spell Plague being an insane period of time. So that was the Second Sundering. And after the Second Sundering, time went on, and I think that's where we now have, like, Forgotten Realms. It's meant to be set... I'm not sure if it's directly after or a couple of thousand years after or 100 years after, but this is all meant to be like ancient history to all of people in Forgotten Realms.
So the Forgotten Realms, and correct me again if I'm wrong here, but the Forgotten Realms has its own calendar, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah. So there is the marking of years is what they use, and they kind of follow it through there with different dates. I've never looked into it too much myself. Because I kind of like hand wave time with my sessions.
Yep.
Like they're like, oh, what's the season? I'm like, you know what? It's winter. The next session will be like in game a week later. Oh, what's the season? I forget. Was it winter? Okay, it's spring now.
All right. Okay.
Yeah. Do you know about this?
There are, if I recall, there are a number of different ways of or different calendars that are used in the sort of societies in the Forgotten Realms, but the most universal one is Dale Reckoning. And I can't quite recall what the details of Dale Reckoning are, but it has something to do with the famed magician Elminster, if I'm not mistaken.
I'm just doing some Googling now. I think I see what you mean. So there's a couple of different methods for this. There's the Dale Reckoning, the Khmer Reckoning, Tethria Reckoning, North Reckoning. The Dale Reckoning is the main one you're talking about. So yeah, it started in year 1. And when the Standing Stone was raised by elves of Corinthia and the human Dale's folk.
That's right,
Since
yeah.
this time, humans were permitted by the Elven court to settle in more open regions of the forest. This calendar is widely used in Faerun, but has not spread beyond its shores.
And that's sort of the calendar and the time reference that I use for all of my games. So I think as of D&D 5th edition, we're in approximately 1495 Dale Reckoning, somewhere along those lines.
Interesting. But that's the world. That's the history of Forgotten Realms. That's how it was created. The story and lore about it, and the Forgotten Realms is the number one most popular setting in there. A lot of the adventures that they have as well, and these stories and books like I was mentioning, Waterdeep, Neverwinter, Baldur's Gate. It's one of the most kind of explored areas, and a lot of people's homebrew are often based in there. I know that my published area that I'm making myself has a lot of inspiration and gods and stuff taken from the Forgotten Realms. But with that being said, I think that's all we've got for the Forgotten Realms for now. Obviously, there's so much information, so much more we could speak about with this one compared to a lot of the other worlds. But a lot of that stuff is things for future episodes. Deities, planes of existence, races, monsters, that stuff we can go over, I think, another day.
So yeah, stick with us, guys, and we'll I think we'll go into more detail for each one of the ages. I think we can go into more detail for different races and societies in the Forgotten Realms. But yeah, I think you're right. I think those are details that we can touch up on a future episode. So make sure you're sticking with us and you're staying up to date. Christian, before we call it a day, where can people stay up to date with all of your updates?
Like I said in the intro video, if you haven't watched it, give it a listen. But on our Facebook, at facebook.com/Hermes D&D, that's where we're going to be doing updates for this podcast, polls for people to take votes on if you want to listen about the Forgotten Realms. Obviously, we're going over future ones now with things such as Dragonlance, Greyhawk, and whatnot. But if you're a Forgotten Realms fanatic, make sure you jump on my Facebook and check out the polls. For yourself, Sven, where can they check it for that?
So you can find us on Twitch, and Twitch has all of our links to our various different socials. That is twitch.tv/crit_n_miss. Make sure you jump on there and find our Facebook page, our Instagram, and all that kind of stuff. We're constantly posting stuff. So
lovely. Well, with that, you all have a lovely morning, afternoon, night, whatever the time or day is, and we'll catch you all in the next one.
Amazing. We'll see you all for episode 3, is it?
Correct.
Episode 3 of the Dungeon Delve podcast. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.
See ya.